Good afternoon. I'll now call the Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, U.S. Postal Service, and Labor Policy to order. And before we begin, as is customary with the full committee and our subcommittees, I will read the Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I believe that there's a unanimous consent request for Representative Napolitano to participate in the hearings, and without objection, it's so ordered. We've got votes that may start in about an hour, so we're going to try to wrap this up as best we can. And with that, I will yield 5 minutes to myself for my opening statement. Today's hearing marks the fourth this year held by this committee to hear testimony relating to the fiscal standing of the United States Postal Service. Unfortunately, today's Postal Service is on a pathway towards insolvency, and the current postal infrastructure is bloated. In fiscal year 2010, the Postal Service operated approximately 32,000 postal facilities and 528 mail processing facilities. Unfortunately, 59.2 million fewer customers visited post offices in 2010, continuing a three-year trend in declining customer visits. Moreover, annual mail volume, predominantly first-class mail, has declined by more than 42 billion pieces since fiscal year 2006. This year, first-class mail has fallen by an astonishing rate of nearly 7%. The handwriting is on the wall. We either make the necessary systemic changes to the postal infrastructure, or we continue to watch it become more outdated and accelerate the demise of the Postal Service. When the Postal Service was confronted with the advent of the universal home delivery at the beginning of the 20th century, it made adjustments. From 1901 to 1970, the Postal Service closed more than 30,000 retail facilities from its peak of 76,945 because universal home delivery demanded changes to their business model. The Postal Service must acknowledge the economic realities it faces today. The fact is, the Postal Service operated at an $8.5 billion loss in 2010 and is projected to lose $8.3 billion this year and another $8.5 billion next year. Today, postal customers are finding it more convenient to purchase postal services away from the traditional brick-and-mortar facilities. Revenue facilities from postal alternatives such as Click and Ship, PC Postage, and USPS.com continue to grow. Unfortunately, the Postal Service has not responded to these challenges with the same vigor that it has done so in the past. For example, despite the trend of postal customers utilizing alternative locations to purchase stamps and mail packages, the Postal Service has closed only 6,000 retail facilities since 1971. According to a Postal Service estimate, retail service cost the USPS an estimated $4.2 billion in fiscal year 2010. With the continuing growth of alternative postal services and the decline in mail volume, the Postal Service can realize tremendous savings by right-sizing retail service locations and consolidating mail processing facilities, while still improving customer access to postal services. I have to applaud Postmaster General Donahoe's vision to return the Postal Service to profitability. The Postmaster General has begun to reduce costs by consolidating facilities and implementing other cost-saving measures. Unfortunately, cost-cutting is not occurring fast enough to keep pace with the Postal Service's decline in revenue. Given the decline, the Postal Service will need to reduce its annual expenses by more than $10 billion just to break even in 2020. Regrettably, labor costs continue to constitute 80% of Postal Service expenses, despite the elimination of 230,000 workers over the last decade. More troubling is the fact that the new contract negotiated with the American Postal Worker Union expands layoff protections for workers, guarantees wage and COLA increases, and insources at least 4,000 positions. As we all know, the Postal Service has announced its intention to default on a $5.5 billion retiree health benefit pre-funding payment due to the Treasury on September 30th, 2011. However, even missing the large payment will not be enough to stave off further insolvency, as the USPS now projects to fall short on a mandatory workers' compensation payment due on October 15, 2011. Therefore, to save the Postal Service, the time to act is now. As Mr. Hurst's testimony states, the status quo for the Postal Service is no longer sustainable, and reform is urgently needed to ensure postal services are available to all Americans. The postal infrastructure is antiquated and must be transformed to accommodate 21st century customer service preferences. I do thank the witnesses that will be appearing today in both panels, and I look forward to their testimony. And I would like to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts and the ranking member, Mr. Lynch, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank our witnesses for coming before the committee to help us with our work. Today's hearing will examine the current state of our postal infrastructure, including the range of retail and mail processing networks operated by the United States Postal Service. In light of the worsening financial challenges faced by the Postal Service, coupled with the steadily decreasing mail volume, we'll be focusing our attention in this hearing on the Postal Service's efforts to generate significant cost savings through network consolidation. As we all know, the Postal Service has reached a financial breaking point. Last month, we received word from the Postal Service that the agency had compiled its second quarterly report for fiscal year 2011. Regrettably, the results were once again deeply troubling. In addition to what the Chairman has noted, the Postal Service ended the second quarter with a net loss of $2.2 billion as compared to a net loss of $1.6 billion during the same reporting period for fiscal year 2010. And this compares with the $1.9 billion and $770 million losses in the second quarter of 2009 and 2008, respectively. So it's clear that despite prior cost-cutting efforts, the situation continues to worsen. In addition, the Postal Service continues to see decreases in total mail volume, which dropped from 42.3 billion to 41 billion pieces. Mailing services revenue also declined by $568 million, and total operating revenue also fell by $500 million. As a result, the Postal Service projects that it will have reached its statutory debt limit of $15 billion by the end of this fiscal year. Were it not for all the other crises we have in this country and the problem with the national debt limit, I think this would be a major, major issue. But it's being overlooked, I think, by some because of all the other priorities that we're concerned with. Moreover, absent legislative change, the Postal Service expects that it will be forced to default on its mandatory payment to the Federal Government, including a $5.5 billion retiree health benefit fund payment due on September 30th of this year. Against this extraordinary financial backdrop, the Postal Service has undertaken action to review its extensive network of retail and mail processing facilities and begin to consolidate its operational infrastructure. Notably, this consolidation initiative falls in line with the advisory recommendations issued in July of 2009 by the Government Accountability Office, which conducted a comprehensive audit of the Postal Service's financial condition and determined that the Postal Service should consider network realignment due to its costly excess capacity. There should be no remaining doubt that the Postal Service's financial situation will require us to make some very difficult choices, including consolidating excess postal infrastructure. However, in doing so, we must be sure to exercise due diligence so as to make certain that any effort to realign the Postal Service retail and mail processing infrastructure does not compromise customer service or delivery standards or cause unnecessary impacts on our dedicated, hard-working postal employees and retirees. The potential realignment of more than 500 mail processing plants merits particular oversight, given their critical connection to universal service and the central role they play as hubs of economic and employment activity. To this end, I strongly urge the Postal Service to adopt a network realignment process that is fair, it is transparent, and it is accountable, and allows for all of the stakeholders, including members of Congress and the communities that are affected, to have input into the process. As is the case with most businesses, communication is critical, so I feel strongly that the Postal Service must be held accountable in terms of making sure communities are fully informed and involved at every juncture of consolidation study, notwithstanding whether it's the closing of a small postal branch in a rural area that has 3 staffers or relocating a large-scale processing and distribution center in an urban area that employs hundreds of workers. In addition, we need to look at other reasonable steps that the Postal Service may take to improve its long-term financial viability. In particular, while the Postal Service has already undertaken a series of revenue-generating and marketing initiatives, we must continue to examine the feasibility of the Postal Service plans to diversify its retail portfolio to include the sale of some non-conventional items as well as expand its marketing strategies and digital platform. Most notably, we can immediately address the significant overpayment by the Postal Service of both its civil service retirement system and the Federal Employees Retirement System liabilities through legislative action. For example, immediately repaying the Postal Service the near $7 billion owed them for their overpayment of their Federal Employee Retirement System obligations will at least place the Postal Service on a better financial footing for this fiscal year, thereby affording us additional time to examine other important alternatives and reforms for the long term. In order to address this matter, I have introduced legislation, H.R. 1351, to rectify these overpayments and allow the Postal Service to use the resulting surplus to cover various on-budget obligations, which will help to improve its current liquidity position. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to our witness testimony this afternoon and hope that we'll all be able to work in a bipartisan manner to get our trusted government institution back on the right track. I want to thank you for yielding the time. I also want to thank you for the unanimous consent agreement that you announced to allow Ms. Grace Napolitano of California to weigh in contravention of the rules of the committee. I also ask you to please consider unanimous consent request to enter into the record the statements of Representative Judy Chu of California and Representative Adam Schiff of California, which I will present for entry into the record.
Without objection, they're entered into the record, and thank you.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. The members may have 7 days to submit opening statements and extraneous materials for the record. At this point, I'd like now to introduce our first panel. Mr. David E. Williams is Vice President of Network Operations Management for the United States Postal Service. Mr. Dean Granholm is Vice President, Delivery and Post Office Operations for the United States Postal Service. And Mr. Philip Herr, that's correct, is a director on the Physical Infrastructure Issues Team at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses must be sworn, so if you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give to this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. We'll now allow each panel member to have 5 minutes to present their opening testimony. Please also note that your written testimony has already been entered into the record here. So with that, I will recognize Mr. Williams for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Dave Williams, and I serve as the Vice President, Network Operations for the Postal Service. I am responsible for the management of a national network of 512 mail processing facilities, as well as coordination of automation initiatives. I am accompanied today by Dean Granholm, Vice President of Delivery and Post Office Operations. Mr. Granholm is responsible for all aspects of mail delivery, as well as operations at nearly 32,000 post offices, stations, and branches. The Postal Service is the cornerstone of a vital industry which impacts every community in America. This year, we will process and deliver over 168 billion pieces of mail. The mailing industry pumps over $1 trillion into the economy every year and employs over 7 million Americans. Over 90% of mail-related jobs are in private companies of all sizes, like mailing and fulfillment services, envelope manufacturers, printers, consolidators, to name a few. The success of these firms depend on a healthy and thriving Postal Service. Today, however, the Postal Service is poised on the brink of a financial crisis, and we need your help to get back on the path of profitability. The Postal Service does not relish being in this position. A little over 5 years ago, in 2005, our debt stood at zero. However, at the end of this fiscal year, we will reach our $15 billion statutory debt limit, and we will not have the cash to make a $5.5 billion retiree health benefit pre-funding payment due September 30th. This payment, mandated by the Postal Act of 2006, is one of the primary drivers of our precarious financial situation. The focus of this hearing is the Postal Service's mail processing and retail infrastructure and our efforts to right-size our overall network. The decline of first-class mail and the increased use of electronic means of communication is something the Postal Service predicted and planned for. We have been closing all types of postal facilities on a continual basis since the early 1970s when we became the self-supporting U.S. Postal Service. Using area mail processing studies and other consolidation activities, we have reduced a sprawling network that once consisted of over 2,000 facilities. Today, our primary outgoing mail processing facilities number less than 300. We are taking a similar approach to reducing the size of our retail infrastructure, which currently consists of roughly 32,000 postal-operated retail locations. Right-sizing our network is one of many strategies the Postal Service has employed to cut costs and improve efficiency. In the past 4 years, the Postal Service has cut costs by $12 billion, including a reduction of career employment of 110,000. Our achievements notwithstanding, a gap still exists between revenue and costs, mainly because of a series outside our control. There are 3 critical areas which need to be addressed this year. They are resolving the retiree health benefit pre-funding requirement, finding a solution to the overfunding of FERS and CSRS pension benefits, and giving the Postal Service authority to adjust delivery frequency. There are a number of bills already introduced in both chambers which address some or all of these issues. We appreciate the hard work and interest of the subcommittee, especially those members who have proposed legislation or plan to introduce bills in the coming weeks. The Postal Service knows how to cut costs, streamline our excess retail and processing network, and make the necessary changes to bring our organization further into the 21st century. But we cannot do it alone. Absent congressional action this year, the Postal Service will face a liquidity crisis. The Postmaster General's stated goal is to reduce our workforce to 400,000 employees and cut costs to $60 billion annually as quickly as possible. How quickly we reach this goal depends largely on the enactment of legislation that will free the Postal Service to pursue even greater levels of efficiency and cost savings. Working together, we can continue the evolution of the nation's postal system into a more stable and viable organization. We look forward to working with all of you. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and we will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Granholm, you're recognized. Okay. You're here for technical response. Thank you very much. Mr. Hur, you're recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Ross, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to participate in this hearing. There's broad agreement that the Postal Service is in a serious financial crisis, linked in part to the 20% decline in mail volume since 2006 and its difficulty aligning revenue with costs. Today, I'll first discuss the urgent need to right-size postal operations and networks, followed by GAO's analysis of changes needed to facilitate progress in restructuring. A few key financial facts make clear why action is needed. As discussed today, the Postal Service has experienced a cumulative net loss of nearly $20 billion over the last 5 fiscal years. By September 30th, it projects it will reach its $15 billion borrowing limit and also not make its mandated retiree health payment to the Federal Government. For this reason, the Postal Service's financial condition and outlook is on GAO's 2011 list of high-risk programs and agencies. I'll discuss 3 areas where realignment is needed. While there are 32,500 postal retail facilities, how customers purchase postal products has changed. In fiscal year 2010, about 1/3 of postal retail revenue came from purchases made outside of post offices, a figure estimated to reach 60% by 2020. Over the past 10 years, visits to post offices have declined by 21%, and revenue from sales at post offices has dropped by 16%, but the number of post offices has remained relatively unchanged. Statutory requirements prohibit closing small post offices solely for operating at a deficit. Yet 80%, about 26,000 postal retail facilities, do not cover their costs. This is simply unaffordable. Postal officials say the time required to close facilities has hindered realignment efforts. The current process can take 270 days once the decision to pursue an individual closure has been reached. Foreign Post reviewed addressed stakeholder resistance through regular outreach. When modernizing its retail network, one European postal operator launched a national campaign that proactively informed customers about how and where they could access postal services in alternate locations. Turning to the processing network of 500 facilities used to sort mail, which has also not been significantly adjusted in response to recent mail volume declines. To its credit, the Postal Service reports that it's evaluating 90 proposals to consolidate processing operations. Excess mail processing capacity remains for several reasons. Single-piece first-class mail has dropped by about 23 billion pieces over the past decade, leaving less mail to be processed end-to-end through the network. In 2009, a senior postal official testified before this subcommittee that there was 50% excess capacity in first-class mail processing operations at that time. Increased automation enables faster and more efficient sorting, and 83% of standard mail now bypasses most of the processing network through a process called drop shipping. Turning to mail delivery, there are ongoing efforts to improve what is the Postal Service's most costly activity, involving delivery to about 150 million points 6 days a week, employing 310,000 carriers. Key efforts to improve delivery operations include realigning city routes and introducing new systems to sort large mail pieces. Congress and the Postal Service urgently need to reach agreement on how to accelerate progress on network restructuring, particularly since many processes for closing facilities have not changed since the 1970s. Some key topics to consider include what aspects of universal service are appropriate in light of fundamental changes in the use of mail. Should delivery standards be modified? How can access to retail services be enhanced while maximizing savings? What statutory or regulatory changes are needed as a catalyst for network-wide restructuring while assuring appropriate oversight and accountability? What role should Congress, the Board of Governors, and the PRC have in modernizing and realigning postal operations? How and when should the Postal Service get public input and provide notice about decisions to close facilities? Additional considerations that could facilitate restructuring include revising legal requirements to facilitate shifting the focus from individual closures to network-wide restructuring, similar to the BRAC approach used by DoD. Improving outreach and transparency through strategic communication with key groups is also important, and simplifying rules, terms, and requirements so that they are easily understood. In closing, right-sizing the Postal Service will require congressional support and senior postal leadership because past attempts at even modest restructuring have faced formidable resistance. Going forward, stakeholders, the unions, management associations, the mailing industry, and political leaders need to recognize that a major realignment of postal networks is imperative for the Postal Service to be financially viable in the 21st century. The status quo is no longer sustainable if the Postal Service is to be self-supporting. This concludes my prepared statement, and I'm pleased to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hur. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. And I do want to recognize also and agree with the Ranking Member, Mr. Lynch, that if it weren't for other crises that are going on right now, in addition to the debt ceiling crises, this would be the major crisis, and most likely will be the major crisis as time progresses. Because where we are today as a country with the United States Postal Service is, after 230 years, it is still one of the most well-established, best infrastructures, going to 150 million homes a day. But we also know, and I want to address this to Mr. Williams, that there are issues out there that we must confront. And I want to hit this one head on with regard to the overfunding issue, which is an issue. I recognize that. There's no question that that is something we have to address. But even assuming we address it to the satisfaction of everybody involved, it still doesn't solve the future problems that the U.S. Postal Service will have, will it?
No, it will not.
In fact, we have to make some systemic changes.
We do.
And that, as you pointed out, reduce the workforce to at least 400,000. We have to consolidate certain processing centers. Let me ask you this. What options does the Postal Service have to create a modern processing network? I toured one facility. There was still a lot of labor-intensive involvement there, where I toured a facility on the private sector where the labor involvement is not near what is done in the U.S. Postal Service. Do you have any suggestions for?
The Postal Service operates one of the most technology advanced systems in the world. We have tremendous infrastructure in place that provides our ability to be very, very efficient in processing mail in our network facilities. But what I'd like to add is our financial situation is such at a critical point right now that having capital programs to even further enhance our infrastructure we simply can't afford.
I agree with you. I mean, you have to have the business plan on one side, and then you have to have the capital investment in order to implement that business plan. And I think that's where these crossroads are going to have a severe train wreck if we're not careful over the next couple of months. With regard to drop ship, it seems to be that private carriers are doing more drop shipping, which is becoming more economically feasible. For example, I toured a facility where they would drop ship to an FSC, I think is what it is.
SCF?
FCF, thank you. Is that something that we ought to look at in terms of transitioning the private sector to providing that as a cost-saving service to the Postal Service?
Our drop ship program, our work share program has been one of the cornerstones in our ability to shrink our infrastructure because mail gets dropped further into our network and it bypasses many of the processing steps. So yes, work sharing, pre-sorting, drop shipping volumes deeper into our network allows us to further contract our infrastructure, our operational footprint, and allows us to be a lot more efficient.
Mr. Herr, you talked about the retail facilities and, in fact, some of the processing facilities, but I want to talk about the retail facilities because we have to agree that the Postal Service is a business.
That's correct.
And it operates on the revenues gained by the ratepayers, the people that buy the service and do that, so forth. So if we're going to assess it based on it being a business, then we have to look at the facilities that are out there that provide the service. And if they're not providing the service at a rate that is at least profitable or break even, then we should get rid of them.
You need to take a hard look.
But not necessarily get rid of them, but wouldn't it be in the best interest of not only the consumers, but also the U.S. Postal Service to look at partnering with established retail outlets?
Yes, it would. That's what we found in our review of foreign posts. That's exactly what we've seen other industrialized countries doing.
In fact, you wouldn't have the investment of the bricks and mortar. You would have probably better hours because it would be utilizing the hours of the retail establishment. Let's say it was a 7-Eleven or a Starbucks or whatever a grocery store may be. Mm-hmm. You could provide the services there, but it would still provide the consumer that which they are desiring from the U.S. Postal Service, and that's what's the day-to-day contact that they want to have.
All right, that's certainly one alternative to do that.
Let me ask you, at the rate that the Postal Service is going now, how many years do you think it would take to eliminate the redundant retail facilities?
Given the rate of change over the past 10 years, I don't, at the rate over the last 10 years, they've closed about 1,000 facilities, more or less, and mainly that's only been when there's an opportunity, say, a vacancy. If they continue at that rate, it won't get done nearly in time, given the gravity of the financial situation we're discussing today.
So we need, as a Congress, we need to empower the Postmaster General to be able to make those decisions based on economic factors in order to reduce the size or the obligations of the Postal Service to sustain those. I believe so. Okay. I see my time is up, and I will now recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herr, you're a frequent flyer to this committee.
Feels like it.
And pretty bright guy, in my opinion. I think we have 38,000 post offices in the United States today. How many do you think we really need?
You know, we have a job that we're just getting underway now, taking a look at the postal network. I've heard different figures. I think one of the things that I would hope that comes out of that review that we're doing now is a better sense of what the core might look like and then how that might be complemented by alternate retail facilities. But in terms of venturing a guess, I don't have a figure. Mr. Granholm's probably thought about this to some degree in his capacity working with postal retail.
All right, Mr. Granholm, want to take a crack at that?
It's a difficult question. We need to build a model that reviews our infrastructure not only today but in 10 years.
Yeah.
When our alternate access grows to the 60% level, it definitely puts a huge strain during that period of time.
Alternate access, what do you mean?
That means where we sell our products in grocery stores, in contract stations, online definitely is a huge growth area for our alternate access. We currently have over 63,000 retail locations that are not our traditional brick and mortar. Those will continue to grow.
Yeah, but just to push back on that, a lot of the stuff we closed was stuff that you expanded. You expanded to airports and malls and places like that. Those are the places we closed. Nobody was using them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and we need to close,
rather than
close more.
I don't want to burn my time on this one question. Here's the problem. Mail volume keeps dropping. And from what I see in Europe and, these online services where you can actually go online and click your mail. If you don't want it delivered, you can just click on it. So I know, what term do they use? They don't use junk mail, but what's the term they use there? What is it?
Electronic mail, hybrid mail.
No. Stuff that, just advertisements that come in the mail.
Business mail.
Right. So if you don't want that delivered, you can just click on it. And a lot of that stuff's going to get clicked on. So as that comes online, less and less and less mail is going to get delivered. And, I talked to the Postmaster General last week, and volume dropped off a cliff again.
Yep.
In this last quarter. And we haven't seen that happen since the economy went in the toilet around, 2008. We saw a big drop. And I know we're not talking about we're not supposed to talk about a double dip, but, if you just take mail volume as an indicator of economic activity, it looks pretty bad. It looks pretty bad. So we got to figure out a way to get this ship back on course. And change is painful. People hate change. I understand that. But if we don't get a hold of this thing and straighten it out, then it's going to further damage the system, and we're going to continue this downward spiral. So we have to make a good, hard look at this. Look, I come from a postal family. My mom was a postal clerk, about 30 years. I've told people before these hearings, I probably have 17 people in my family, my cousins, in-laws, everybody who work for the post office. And, a lot of them are retirees. I worry about their benefits going away and what they work for and what they were promised. So we've got to get serious about this. And if there are postal facilities, I was an iron worker for 18 years. And all I did for 18 years just about was build bridges and high-rises. And every time we built a high-rise, whether I was in New York or Boston or Chicago, we'd stick a post office on the bottom floor. And the volume of mail would justify the location of that post office. But we'd pay top dollar for that location. And we are paying top dollar now. In every major city in America, we're paying top dollar Class A office space for a post office to be located there. And there's a high-rise across the street. And we're paying that rent too. So what I'm saying is, okay, let's look at some of these urban areas where you got facilities across the street from each other that are both paying enormous rents, and let's close one of them and make them walk their mail across the street to the next one. We could save a lot of money that way. The plain fact of the matter is that this labor-intensive activity that we see at the post office, we call that work. That's work. And it takes work to sort the mail, and it takes work to deliver the mail. Until we come up with a robot letter carrier, we're going to have to pay these folks to go out and deliver the mail. And we're adding 1 million addresses a year. So, there's more and more work as people are moving to the suburbs, and we're still servicing those groups. So, getting rid of people is not going to maintain the quality of service. I know I'm way over my time, and you're being extremely gracious, but I'll save the rest for the rest of the hearing. But we've got to really look at the expense side of this thing. We're spending a lot of money on facilities that we're underutilizing, and I think that's one of the areas that we're neglecting to address. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Amash, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our panel. Mr. Williams, with mail volume declining significantly over the past several years, why does the Postal Service continue to maintain significant excess mail capacity?
The Postal Service has been very aggressive in eliminating excess capacity, and we define capacity in a couple of ways. We've got capacity with staffing, we've got capacity with machines, and we've got capacity with facilities. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we have been dealing with that capacity. We've pulled out thousands of machines out of our mail processing network. We've pulled out, over the last 4 years, 1 out of every 3 work hours in our mail processing operations have been extracted from the system. So we are looking at every opportunity. Because of our dire financial situation, we have been looking at every opportunity to cut costs and to take out capacity, staffing, machines, and now we are in a position right now where we haven't been, in my career, we have been dealing with more area mail processing and other mail processing consolidations than we ever have that I know of in the past. We're up to 138 consolidation opportunities right now on the mail processing side. So we are being very aggressive with cost cutting.
Now, you mentioned staffing. If the Postal Service has reduced its number of employees by 230,000 since 2001, then why does labor still make up 80% of the cost?
Our entire operational footprint is continuing to shrink. So we are shrinking not only our labor costs, we're shrinking the facilities, we're shrinking overhead. We've pulled out this year alone, year to date, about 2 million square feet of space out of our operations. So as we continue to contract the entire operating cost of the Postal Service, we're doing it not only on the labor side, but also on the other components of cost outside of labor.
Now, and you want Congress to get involved. Why should Congress be involved here? Isn't it more important for the Postal Service to address its business model and make some changes internally?
We are doing everything that we can do, but we need help from Congress. We need to address the retiree health benefit pre-funding. We need to address the overfunding of CSRS and FERS pension, and we need the ability to determine the delivery frequency for the Postal Service that will allow us to continue to shrink our infrastructure.
Isn't it just kicking the can down the road?
No, we believe with our plan that we put in place on March 2nd, our comprehensive plan, our initiatives around cost cutting that we have control over. We believe that if we get the retiree health benefit, if we get the overfunding issues around FERS and CSRS, and have the ability to determine the delivery frequency, we believe that that will address the issues and improve the viability of the Postal Service.
If workers' compensation costs are ignored, are the Postal Service costs up this year? Is that correct?
If the workers' compensation are ignored,
yeah.
I don't understand the question.
They put it down over the course of the year. Ignore that cost, expenses are up so far this year over the first 7 months.
So if you ignore the payment over the
adjusted payment for the year.
yeah, the adjusted payment for the year, I'm sorry.
I don't have that information. I'd be happy to respond for the record.
Okay. Mr. Herr, I've got a few seconds here still. Is the Postal Service moving fast enough to right-size its workforce?
Given the gap between the revenues and the expenses, not in our judgment, they are not.
And what fundamental weaknesses in their business model would you say they have?
Well, but right now, the profitable mail, first-class mail, is dropping, as acknowledged earlier today in the hearing by Mr. Lynch and Mr. Ross. It's dropping considerably and with no end in sight. And what I think ultimately what will be left will be the standard mail, which doesn't bring in that much revenue.
Would you attribute the Postal Service's problems to Congress or to, or should the Postal Service take more responsibility here, in your opinion?
Well, I think Postal Service needs to articulate what its vision would look like. One area we talked a little bit about earlier would be on the retail side. The Postal Service laid out a vision for what 5-day delivery, what potential savings would come with that. I think an alternate study relative to the alternate, what might happen with the retail network would be a nice complement to that to give Congress a sense of what potential cost savings there might be.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Mr. Williams, according to some of your post-implementation reviews, what is the largest areas of saving usually generated from processing and consolidations?
The largest savings component, typically in an area mail processing study and validated in our post-implementation review, are typically labor costs.
And in considering a move to 5-day delivery, has the Postal Service evaluated what impact such a move will have on processing and distribution centers? And without Saturday mail, I would assume that these facilities would experience increased workload on Monday or possibly Tuesday if a holiday fell on a Monday.
The Postal Service has a very robust modeling process where we model every single plant across the network. And in that modeling process, which is where we identify candidates for consolidation opportunities based on match and demand with excess capacity and determining which facilities are candidates for closure, in that process, we have included the scenario of 5-day delivery and the impact that added volume into Monday's processing into that scenario. So we have included the 5-day delivery scenario in our modeling, and we have completed that effort last year.
Mr. Williams and Mr. Hur, could I ask you, in light of recent increases in the price of fuel, transportation obviously continues to be a key cost driver in the postal system. So as the Postal Service moves to downsize or right-size the number of mail processing facilities in the network, is it logical to assume that these trucks are going to have to travel further in terms of their routes and the mail that they will deliver?
I'll take that first. As we shrink the infrastructure of mail processing and have fewer network buildings in our network, what we're actually seeing is the opportunity to consolidate not only workload into a building, but to consolidate mail onto our trucks and our vehicles. So we're able to build bigger loads and actually have fewer trucks. In fact, year-to-date through March, we have taken out, compared to prior year March, we have taken out approximately 56 million miles out of our network. So consolidating facilities, having fewer nodes in our network is actually driving bigger loads for transportation and therefore allowing us to have less miles and less consumption in terms of transportation.
Would the cost of fuel, as it continues to fluctuate, but I guess it goes up more than it goes down, unfortunately. But would the cost of fuel negate perhaps some of those savings or?
The cost of fuel, all things being equal, as long as we're taking miles out of the system and taking consumption out of the system, all things being equal, we are saving. If we had those miles still in the system, those 56 million miles that we pulled out year over year in March, would have just exacerbated our fuel spend because prices continue to rise, and from our standpoint, it's taking consumption out, taking miles out, and balancing this whole demand equation with capacity. And that includes staffing, includes facility footprint, and it includes transportation.
What would either one of you say to those individuals who continue to suggest that there might be some additional cost-cutting, cost-saving opportunities for the system?
We are in a serious financial situation. We have got to act with speed. We have to We have to make good, sound business decisions, and we are looking at every opportunity to cut costs. There will be further cost-cutting initiatives down the road. We can't afford not to question every cost in our system and look for opportunities to reduce cost and to reduce our operating footprint to make sure that we are matching our capacity with the changing customer behavior that we're seeing with our volume declines.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to sit on the dais. And I have a ton of questions plus a lot of information to submit for the record. And I've been listening with great interest. We have in my area a distribution center that is scheduled, I'm sure you already have been briefed, for transition over to another area, which is roughly 30 miles away in one of the most heavily trafficked area of southeast LA County, from industry to Santa Ana, California. We started working since January of '09, and according to what I'm reading from the staff report is that by law you have to notify the area that you will be closing. There was no notification, or at least none that I found out. I found out from the employees who called my office to give us the information, and so we started delving into. Since then, I have asked for verbally, in writing, you name it, to try to get information from any of the postal authorities, local, Washington, and I've been given what I would call the runaround. The report that was given to me is blank. The second report I received, it's all, they called it redacted, which is blacked out. So essentially, we can't make any comparison. You say this is information that is proprietary. Well, how are we to be able to understand what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it? Now, the report indicates there's 26 employees that will be either transferred or may end up moving along in their retirement, whatever. Yet, there is no real way for me to understand what's going to happen. There's no plan B. What happens if Santa Ana can't afford them, cannot accept that amount of traffic? Now, understanding that in December, you moved some of it to industry, Christmas mail, because Santa Ana couldn't handle it. So that tells me there's an issue. I've asked for capacity. What is the capacity of one versus the other? The footprint. I can't get any information from you guys. It's proprietary. Why? Can't we get some information so that I can tell my cities? And by the way, I have letters and city council resolutions in the packet telling you and this committee of their opposition without information. So I'm very frustrated by all this. And then when I hear, and by the way, into the record I'm introducing a postal report news blog on significant degradations in service, Lima consolidation. And they state very openly, report delayed, lost, damaged bills, payments, packages, and medicine. Now, in my quarter, I have the city of industry, which is 95% industrial. These are people that ship in and out, that are constantly doing a package mailing or mail, and we're saying, sorry guys, you don't matter. This industrial area, which is one of the hubs of the LA County, it doesn't matter. We're sending it to Santa Ana, which is mostly residential. Well, not residential, it's got a mixture of everything. So there has been no way for me to be able to gauge what is being based on. When you talk about the junk mail, are you studying, are you increasing those rates? Because 2/3 of my mail at home is junk. Who's paying for that? Is it being at the expense of regular mail or other services? Are you studying anything that is going to tell us, are you retiring people, are you allowing them to retire, and you say that you've done some review to be able to make up for that loss in USPS income? There's a million questions that I have, and I'd like to, Mr. Chairman, introduce into the record several files that I have on this. And I would like to just show up for you guys' edification. This is what I received. Thank you very much. Isn't that nice? Blanks. Black. So to me, it is not the way you treat a request from members of Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And without objection, it's so entered into the record. Thank you. That being the last of our panelists, I want to thank our questions. I want to thank the panelists for being here. We're going to take just a brief break, just a minutes break to get our next panel going and hopefully have a chance to get done before they call us for votes. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll reconvene, and I appreciate everybody's patience here, and I want to again thank the second panel for their patience as well, and thank you for being here. I'll introduce our second panel. We have Mr. Michael Wynn, who is President of Greylock Associates, Mr. Joe Heaty, thank you, is President and CEO of Air Transport Services Group, and Mr. Cliff Guffey is President of the American Postal Workers Union. As you all know, pursuant to committee rules, we swear in our witnesses. I'd ask you to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give to this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Please be seated. I'm going to now recognize each of you for 5 minutes for your opening statements, and please note that your written opening has been entered into the record. With that, I'll recognize Mr. Wynn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the entire subcommittee for allowing me to testify today. First, may I introduce R.R. Donnelly. R.R. Donnelly is a Fortune 250 company and is the largest printer in North America. We employ nearly 35,000 people across 45 states. Printing is one of the largest domestic manufacturing industry, and R.R. Donnelly has production facilities in 26 states, coast to coast, border to border. Anybody have a Verizon wireless phone? We print the statements and put them in the mail for you. And magazines such as The Economist, very timely, very critical with delivery of content to their customers. And do you receive an IKEA catalog or brochure? We've been recognized as an award-winning provider for IKEA. And what about Williams-Sonoma from California? We produce many of their catalogs and promotional material and perform mailing and logistics services for them. And for the U.S. government, we are proud to have printed 160 million first-class mail pieces for the 2010 census, as well as about 40 million Medicare and U booklets. R.R. Donnelley doesn't just print material and deliver it back to our customers. We print material and deliver it for our customers, collaborating with the United States Postal Service, deploying a sophisticated logistics network nationwide. The health and viability of the Postal Service is critical to our business. And may I introduce myself? I was an employee of R.R. Donnelley for over 35 years. Currently, I am retired. That's open to interpretation, but I still represent R.R. Donnelley on postal matters in Washington. My positions over my career range from introducing new technologies and managing operations, running some of the largest plants in the R.R. Donnelley network. I was invited to testify today because of my experience with facility and capacity management. And that's what this testimony is all about, facility and capacity management to meet the demands of customers. That reflects the need to manage equipment, buildings, locations, and employees. In the private sector, we answer to stockholders, stakeholders, our communities, and employees. They all examine what we are doing, executing our responsibilities as caretakers of the organization. There is very little room for forgiveness. In my career, there were many difficult decisions, laying off groups of people, shutting down pieces of equipment, and closing plants, all of which affected people's lives, customers, and communities. Please let me relate just one story about this responsibility of management. In 1976, I began my career with R.R. Donnelley as an engineer in a plant located in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. The plant was started in 1960 to serve customers in the northeast part of the United States. Many great people taught me to trade and helped me become a member of management. In 2003, I was responsible for the operation of 3 plants, 2 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the Old Saybrook plant. It became painfully obvious that I needed to shrink capacity and to meet the demand of my customers and serve them in the best way possible. Customers would benefit from the closure of Old Saybrook and the combination of operations into Lancaster. I closed Old Saybrook. There were 484 employees in the plant, and all were retrained, relocated to other positions within R.R. Donnelley or other employers. The plant was closed and sold. All of the equipment was relocated or sold. All of the community obligations were met, including things like our commitment to the United Way. There were 3 employees that helped start the plant up in 1960 that were relocated as a result of this closure. Painful? Yeah, you bet. But it was absolutely necessary to meet my responsibilities and obligations to shareholders, customers, and stakeholders of R.R. Donnelley. That is what responsible management does in the private sector. Why do I tell this story? And how does it relate to the United States Postal Service? Well, the USPS has the same issues that I face: capacity management of processing and management of employees. That all means expense to the USPS's operation, and all that needs to be absorbed by someone. Usually, that's the ratepayer. That is why they are all seeking alternate ways of delivering their message to the customer. Electronic substitution and alternate delivery will not go away and may be sought by more of the USPS's customers if rates go up. As a nation, we need a strong and viable postal delivery service. That means the USPS management must step up to the responsibility of managing capacity processing and the retail system to match demand. There is no need for 30,000 or more retail stores. By the way, that's more than McDonald's has worldwide. There is no need for 400 processing facilities. The demand was for 206 billion mail pieces in 2006. Now it's on to 167 billion. Projections are for, 150 billion in 2002. The USPS has many strong advantages to help it compete. They're masters at delivering the last mile. They should concentrate on that. Outsource retail operations to supermarkets and other existing establishments to save employees and facilities expense, reduce the number, size, and complex nature of the processing network. Make the USPS user-friendly and control the costs. That's what we do in the private sector.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn. Mr. Heath, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Ross and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today and assist with identifying real solutions for the United States Postal Service. This hearing is a vital step toward averting the looming business liquidity crisis as the USPS is on the brink of insolvency due to continued losses in both mail volume and revenue. My name is Joe Heedy, and I'm Chief Executive Officer for Air Transport Services Group, which is the parent company of ABX Air and 4 other wholly owned subsidiaries. It was only 2 short years ago that I testified before the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee about the devastating impact of DHL opting to pull out of the domestic market and its potential impact on our company, its employees, and our community. ABX Air, headquartered in Wilmington, Ohio, was part of a Fortune 1000 organization with annual revenues exceeding $1.6 billion, with over 12,000 employees. On May 28, 2008, ABX Air was notified by DHL that it was in negotiations with UPS to take over DHL's air uplift for DHL Express U.S. domestic and international shipments within North America. This news devastated the company and community. On November 10th, with still no UPS deal and many people uncertain of what was next, DHL again would make an announcement that would accelerate the decline of what was ABX Air's business model. It announced it would pull out of the domestic market completely, effective January 30, 2009. All 15 hub locations across the United States would be closed, and ABX Air would be forced to make a quick business model transition, including a mass reduction in force. What was ABX Air declined to just under 1,000 employees. While the USPS is not exactly in a similar situation, there are many parallels between the business challenges and threats of its current business environment in the last 36 months for ABX Air and its sisters companies. The USPS is an iconic institution that the American people have grown to trust and respect when it comes to service and reliability. In its own right, it would be considered the first social network. Regrettably, the USPS has seen its market share decrease over a long period of time, and volume has continued on a sharp decline. Several factors are outside the control of the USPS and are driving the decline, specifically technology that is continually evolving. In fiscal 2010, 170.6 billion pieces of mail were delivered, a drop of 6 billion pieces from the previous year. It is estimated that volume will continue to decline at the rate of 7% every year. Not unlike ABX Air, the USPS is now forced into an unfortunate position that will demand it restructure its business model to ensure its long-term viability. The USPS has offered solutions that include exigent rate increase of 5.6%, which was denied by the Postal Regulatory Commission, reduce mail delivery from 6 days to 5 days per week, to refund overpayments to the Civil Service Retirement Fund of $5.5 billion to pre-fund retiree health benefits, and $1.2 billion to Federal Government Workers' Compensation Insurance Fund, and flexibility to close postal and sorting locations that are underutilized. While helpful, these solutions do not address one major factor that has the potential to significantly contribute to the long-term financial stability, which is to restructure its labor costs to match its current level of operations. Beginning immediately after the May 2008 announcement, ABX Air began to explore plans for restructuring its workforce based on what it then believed to be the go-forward plan for support for DHL. It engaged its employees, being transparent on what the changes in the business model would mean for all those involved. ABX Air was able to make changes to much of its workforce, free from the encumbrances of an employee base predominantly represented by a union. Wages were reduced, pension plans were frozen and replaced with defined contribution plans, and paid time off was reduced. It was a sobering experience when it appeared all 12,000 ABX Air jobs would be eliminated because of DHL's announcement. However, ABX Air's flexible workforce relationships allowed us to go back to our customers and offer solutions to retain parts of their business. The USPS has made attempts to restructure its workforce to manage diminishing mail volumes. Using attrition and early retirement buyout options as its primary attempt to right-size its organization, a 16% reduction in upper-level management, and minimal closings of underutilized post offices in operation. It has yet to achieve the efficiencies it needs to survive. The USPS's inability to reduce its workforce to match its operational needs due to legacy union contracts and no layoff clauses restricts its potential to continue to be the most trusted government agency. Its reputation has been earned over hundreds of years of hard work and reliable service. Unmistakably, the USPS business model needs to change. ATSG developed a comprehensive business strategy that segmented specific functions from ABX Air and created sister companies to align its workforce and core lines of business with current market needs. Through these initiatives, we were able to position our company for job growth, and we are growing. By identifying our strengths, we developed business lines that offered us the strongest chances of success. That success resulted in 25% job growth. We succeeded. We are the anchor for redevelopment and growth in our community. USPS needs the authority to redevelop and implement its business strategy. However, the USPS has offered solutions. However, none of these solutions fix the cost and productivity constraints that are imposed by the union contracts. The USPS is hindered in acting in the best interest of its shareholders, every American household that receives mail. Though the USPS has not used taxpayer funding, it is here today because it is in financial distress. The current union contracts are cost prohibitive and contribute to the severe financial losses. This should not go unaddressed. We had a union contract with our pilots, but the financial viability of our company won out over perpetuating non-competitive labor agreements. Restructuring is required. What you have been doing is no longer a viable plan, and for the USPS it will take many forms. We need to give them every opportunity to achieve their core business objective. There are dire consequences that have been identified by the USPS as it teeters on insolvency, and one is that in fiscal year 2012, the USPS may not be able to make its payroll.
Mr. Heady, I'm going to need you to probably wrap up. Thank you.
I've watched the USPS from afar, and they mirror many of our struggles over the last few years. However, unlike the USPS, we had a nimble workforce that we could maneuver to build a better business model after a devastating loss of business. When the industry thought we were going to fail, our stock price was at its lowest point of 12 cents per share. Stakeholder confidence was at an all-time low, and our employees were down but not broken. Today, we are a thriving and growing company, and our stock has increased more than 50-fold. I look forward to working with you to address these issues and find solutions that will keep the Postal Service as a viable part of our economy. I will be happy to answer your questions you might have.
Thank you. Mr. Guffey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
If you wouldn't mind, just make sure that mic's on and bring it closer to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Cliff Guffey, President of the American Postal Workers Union. I am here today to address the modification of the retail and mail processing networks of the Postal Service in response to diminishing mail volume. First, I want to respond to the title of this hearing, Postal Infrastructure, How Can We Afford It? We, in this question, is postal customers, not taxpayers. After the passage of the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970, the Postal Service progressively phased out its reliance on federal appropriations. Beginning in the 1980s, in a series of omnibus budget resolutions aimed at balancing the federal budget, many billions of dollars in cost were shifted from the federal government to postal ratepayers. Today, the Postal Service receives no subsidy from the federal government, only compensation for services rendered. If the Postal Service is to act in a businesslike manner, as its critics have often implored to do, it should be permitted to change and charge businesslike rates as other national posts are permitted to do. I do not say this lightly. We see the mailing community as customers and Postal Service supporters, not as adversaries. We know that the suggestion that rates should be permitted to increase more than inflation is not welcome to them, particularly in difficult financial times. We are not presuming to set postage rates. We are saying that on a rate-by-rate basis, the Postal Service needs to have the flexibility to increase rates in order to find a way to cover its cost. This has been and continues to be a time of rapid change in the Postal Service. Between 1999 and 2010, the postal workforce has been reduced by 458 million work hours. This is the equivalent of removing 259,000 full-time employees from the employment rolls. People represented by the APW made up 67% of that total reduction. That is the equivalent of eliminating 174,000 full-time jobs in APW bargaining units. Postal workers have been directly affected by these changes. Normal attrition among bargaining unit employees has reduced the complement of bargaining unit employees as fast as the need for workers has been reduced by facility closures and consolidations, and by other steps taken to increase efficiency. This will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. Approximately 37% of the workers in the APW bargaining units will be eligible for retirement by 2014. The APW has actively resisted some consolidations of mail processing operations where we have reason to question the accuracy of the Postal Service's projected cost savings and service impacts. In many cases, we have found that cost savings have been overestimated and that actual potential cost savings cannot justify the adverse service impacts of the changes under consideration. An example of these problems was recently documented by the OIG in its report on the area mail processing study and consolidation of operations from Lima, Ohio to Toledo, Ohio. After the usual AMP study, management consolidated mail processing operations from Lima to Toledo in 2010. The OIG found that postal customers in Lima experienced, quote, significant degradation in service, and management did not project these degradations in the APM proposal, unquote. After these service problems arose, management addressed them in part by increasing employees in Toledo by implementing 2 additional Lima hub facilities. But at the time of the OGI report of this AMP, the problems had not been solved. Similar points need to be considered concerning the closing or consolidation of retail operations. The APW has been vocal critic of the Postal Service plans to close or consolidate some of its retail operations. As we showed in proceedings before the Postal Regulatory Commission, these closures adversely affect individual postal customers who are least able to afford alternative services and small businesses that continue to rely heavily on the Postal Service. In many cases, postal customers, both individuals and small businesses, community leaders, and elected representatives have strongly opposed post office closures because of the negative impacts they have affected communities. We strongly urge postal policymakers to think creatively about how the Postal Service should be adapting its retail services to meet society's current needs. Senator Carper has introduced legislation that would permit the Postal Service to partner with other government agencies at the federal, state, and local levels to more efficiently deliver government services and to provide sufficient economic justification to maintain a postal presence in rural or economically disadvantaged communities. We strongly support these ideas and observe that the time to pursue them actively is now. It would be tragic to dismantle the postal retail infrastructure and lose an opportunity to maintain it and improve the delivery of government services. In closing, I want to particularly emphasize the importance of maintaining postal presence in small communities. The Post Office provides a unique public service that is still necessary for many people. Being from Oklahoma, which has many small towns and rural post offices, I can tell you from firsthand experience that the Postal Service is a focal point of many small communities. It's where the flag flies. It's where the government can provide support for the community. In all that we do during this time of change and economic challenge, consideration must be given to the availability of postal services and other necessary services that may be offered through the Postal Service. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Guffey. I see they've called us for votes, so hopefully we can get this all done in time. With that, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Wynn, your testimony is very poignant in the sense that I think it tries to finally show how significant the Postal Service is to so many walks of life and to this economy. I'm reminded that because of R.R. Donnelly's need for the Postal Service and its infrastructure to deliver its product of a trucker who has all these products to deliver by or ship by way of his truck, but then has this interstate system closed off and can't accomplish that. So, but I also see from what you've done is that you've made changes over the years to adapt to market trends, to adapt to technology. And my question to you is what would you recommend that the U.S. Postal Service do to try to adapt as well?
With considerable respect to Mr. Williams, who testified before me and who was a wonderful associate at the Postal Service, the AMP process that he spoke about, the area mail processing consolidation and elimination of facilities, is extremely cumbersome. Where I closed a plant in Connecticut, it was done in 10 months, and everything was done. The plant was closed, people were retrained and relocated, and the equipment was all moved, and all the customers were moved. I would say that the best thing we could do for the Postal Service and for Mr. Williams would be to help him shorten the AMP process and make it, quite frankly, less than the painful process it is today.
Thank you. Mr. Heady, you have a great testimony as well. I mean, you've adapted to a major client removing itself from the market, and yet you adapted significantly well. In fact, keeping the jobs that you did and reestablishing yourself in the market. Are you satisfied with what the Postal Service is doing to realign its processing and retail networks at this point?
I think, we do some current work with the Postal Service. We operate through their STC facilities for them in Memphis, Dallas, and Indianapolis, as well as we're involved in a pilot project for consolidating and deconsolidating truckloads. So they're doing some of the right things. I think it's the speed at which they do it, but the one piece, as I touched on in my testimony, that doesn't seem to get much attention is the cost of the labor that it takes to provide the services of the U.S. Postal Service. If you compare the Postal Service wage and benefit packages to those of the private sector, for years we were a subsidiary of Airborne Inc. before we sold to DHL. We did all the sorting for Airborne and DHL both, and the wage and benefit differentials between the private sector and the Postal Service are significant, as much as 50% higher on the wage piece than what we were paying in the private sector.
Mr. Guffey, I think there's some things that you and I agree on. And I think that it's good common ground. For example, in your testimony, when you talk about how it's not the taxpayers, but it's the customers, it's the ratepayers that are more affected by this. And I think you and I will agree that for years the United States Postal Service has been self-sustaining, self-sufficient. And it is a business, and I admire that, and I think that it is a business and can operate and should operate well into the future on its own with the rates that it takes in. The second thing I think I agree with you is that you stated in an article on January 24, 2011, that the USPS can only remain relevant and resolve its financial difficulties if it improves and expands its service. I think service is important. And I would assume then that you're suggesting that services to the customers needs to be improved. If that service also includes the closing of post offices or retail facilities or mail processing centers because of the lack of capacity, would you not agree that that's something that ought to be done?
There are opportunities and places where the Postal Service's post offices should be closed. As I said, I'm from rural Oklahoma. Many towns used to have 4,000 or 5,000 people in them. Now they're maybe down to 400 or 500 people. Those services should be transferred over to something like a community post office. But in our contract this time, in the larger cities, we have given reduced prices and also provided 20% of the workforce without legacy costs to the Postal Service so that they could keep offices open longer without paying overtime so that the community could come when it's relevant to the community. In other words, many post offices in this country close at 5 p.m. Well, that's when the businesses empty and people need to come use the services, and so we provided them without overtime an opportunity to keep the post offices open so that it would be more relevant to the business community.
And you're open to innovation. And one of the things I would just draw your attention to, and I think those of the United States Postal Service as my time runs out here, is that 20-some years ago, I read a book called In Search of Excellence, Thomas Peters and Robert Westerman, and talked about Fortune 500 companies who were successful because of certain things they did. And they had 8 themes, and one of those was close to the customer, learning from people served by the business, autonomy and entrepreneurship, fostering innovation, nurturing champions, simple form, lean staff. Some of the best companies have minimal HQ staff. I just offer that as I close here. My time is up, but I hope that those that not only with the APWU but also the United States Postal Service have a chance to look at. With that, I'll recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I won't use all that time. I know we have 17 votes that are being scheduled, and I want my colleagues to be able to get a chance to ask questions. First of all, Mr. Wynn, thank you for your attendance here. Mr. Heady, thank you as well for your involvement. President Guffey, in the previous panel, there was a group that, well, there were some witnesses talking about reducing the frequency of delivery. I assume that's they're talking about 5-day delivery. I've got some concerns that the projections of savings, as in other cases, aren't quite what well, I think they're overstated, going to 5-day delivery. Now, I understand this affects the letter carriers more than it affects your folks, because post offices will still be open on Saturday, but they won't deliver on Saturday. But I'm just concerned that taking the Postal Service delivery out of the picture for Saturdays, and that appears how it's going to be implemented. There will be no mail delivery on Saturday or Sunday. I'm just concerned that that would cause customers to look at the situation of mailing something on Thursday and say, well, should I call FedEx or UPS instead of the post office, since there's a chance, well, I know that it's not going to be delivered Saturday or Sunday. I might have to wait till Monday to have a certain piece of mail delivered. And I'm worried that it takes the post office out of that space and will not only not save money, but by driving mail volume to your competitors on the weekends, it'll actually accelerate the decline in mail volume handled by the Postal Service. And I'm wondering if, you're a pretty smart guy, you know this business pretty well. Am I reading this wrong?
I hate any I dislike any opportunity that is taken to reduce the service to the American public. I would hope that if this does come about, that the Postal Service will reinstate its ability to deliver special deliveries so that medicines and necessary packages and parcels and priority mail and that type of thing will be delivered on Saturday. But again, I would not like to see that any service deteriorate, but the necessities of the company will probably be taken in consideration in the overall bills that are passed, or ultimate bills that are passed in Congress.
Okay. The other thing, Mr. President Guffey, I know that you just concluded negotiations on a labor contract, and it was, and I've seen over the years the willingness of the labor unions at the Postal Service to bring in technology to, create efficiencies there. And I know that the contract that you agreed to was a pretty tough contract to bring back to your members. It was really, the increases are modest.
We froze wages for 3 years.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about that, about, what your contract negotiations were involved? I know that your co-witnesses have talked about the need to reduce labor costs, and I thought it was a pretty tough contract and one that recognized the realities of the situation.
Well, we recognize that maybe we're no longer in an 8-to-5 world because we work 24 hours a day, but the shifts no longer can be necessarily 8 straight hours. So it gave the Postal Service the ability to post positions that could be 410s, various configurations on different days, different hours, and we gave them the ability to have a lower wage workforce to come in to supplement. We recognize that in the long term, the Postal Service is going to look a lot different over the next 15, 20 years. We could not project what it looked like 35 years ago when I came to work for the Post Office, what it looked like now, and our membership cannot project what it will look like 25 years from now. The tragedies and mistakes that have been made, I think, the Post Office tried to enter the electronic communications world many years ago, and Congress kind of barred it from happening. But I read in the papers now where they're saying, why don't they change their business model to do this or do that? And they basically were prevented from doing some of that. But I think electronic communications is the future. Whether or not the Postal Service will have a piece of that, we don't know.
I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Heath, in your testimony, you make the suggestion that the Postal Service should restructure its labor costs to match its current level of operations. You are aware that the recently negotiated contract between the Postal Service and the Postal Workers Union contains a number of new workforce and labor flexibilities for management to use. Do you think any of these changes are the kind that you're talking about in your testimony?
Well, certainly any flexibility you get with the workforce, as Mr. Guffey had testified to, that they've got changes where they can vary shifts according to demand flows, et cetera, are all going to be helpful. The question always is whether what you've done is enough to bring the entity to solvency. I mean, in the private sector, the difficulty is if you're not making money, you're not going to be in business very long. and you don't have anybody else to look to, banks aren't going to lend you money if you're not making a profit. And there is, at what point do you need to tweak the labor costs in terms of either increased efficiency, lower benefits, or more contributions by employees for benefits? I'm not familiar enough with the details, but I do know that in comparison to the private sector, postal costs are significantly greater.
All of us are aware of the fact that the Postal Service is the only government entity required to pre-fund its retiree health benefits at an accelerated rate over a truncated 10-year period. To date, the Postal Service has set aside over $40 billion in their retiree health benefits account to meet this mandate and are required to deposit an additional $5.5 billion by the end of September. Given its current financial situation, do you think it might be reasonable that they not have to meet that requirement?
You're asking me that question?
Yes.
Yeah, in the private sector for retiree health benefits, as a general rule, you do not have to pre-fund those. It's kind of a pay-as-you-go system. But again, that doesn't change the systemic cost structure. That's more or less a one-time give back.
And I guess my last question would be, would either one of you be prepared for the Postal Service to raise its debt limit? Do you see that as any kind of possibility that would be beneficial to the operation of the postal system?
I do not. I do not.
I would agree.
I would agree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think we can still make a vote.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for your brevity. I want to thank the panel as well for being here, again, taking the time out of your schedule. And with that, this subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.